In the previous video, we looked at the concept of the green invisible hand, which is our modern 21st century version of the original founding principle of capitalism, Adam Smith, invisible hand, 18th century. I'm sure you heard about it. Now, the green invisible hand does the same thing the original Adam Smith's invisible hand does, but because it's green, it allocates, it reaches for everything low carbon. Low carbon business activities, labor, products and materials and services and resources, right? And by doing that, by reaching for everything low carbon, it stimulates business activities, markets and resources in a way that's congruent with our decarbonization efforts, right? Because it's green invisible hand. Why is the green invisible hand reaching for everything low carbon? Well, because getting rid of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and from everything, all aspects of society, whether it's transport or energy or making concrete or steel, everything, we have recognized it as a singular objective that 200 countries all over the world are behind getting rid of carbon dioxide from everything, right? And it's behind the Kyoto Protocol and behind Paris agreements and all the net zero target, and that's why we have these carbon markets. And a green invisible hand is a market-based instrument. So pricing carbon means that where it reaches, that's where we will kind of achieved low carbon society, decarbonized society. And in a previous video, we looked at examples where the green invisible hand works. I gave you the examples from New Zealand and Australia, where the farmers are planting trees on their farm, and that's drawing carbon from the atmosphere and storing it, where they store carbon in the soil, or where they reduce methane from their cattle. So, and they do it for financial return, right? They earn carbon credits. In New Zealand, they called NZUs, New Zealand units, and in Australia, they are called ACCUs, Australian Carbon Credit Units. So if you missed that video, go to the video description and there is an article as well, that's for background. Now, so last time, we looked at where the green invisible hand works. Fantastic. Now, today though, we will look at where the green invisible hand actually destroys the environment, which is a paradox, right? If it's green, how come it can destroy the environment? Isn't that a paradox? Well, in today's video, I'm gonna give you examples of where this green invisible hand can actually castrate or maim or harm the environment. How? By reaching underneath these biodiverse rich rainforests and forests. It reaches underneath because it's a market instrument, and it gets these minerals that are necessary for wind turbines, car batteries and other decarbonization infrastructure, and it destroys these biodiverse rich ecosystems. Well, that's something we're gonna address today. I am Jan from sustainablebutterflies.com.au, and on the screen you see my 5 pillars of sustainability. Now, before we go to Western Australia and the Congo Basin for these examples of where the green invisible hand actually harms the environment, let me just give you a little bit of context. Now, there are two tendencies. I see two tendencies and many others, of course. I see these two that I want to highlight. Now, one tendency is this effort to decarbonize. So for 200 plus years, we have been addicted to fossil fuels. As you, I'm sure, know, I don't want to insult your intelligence. You know about climate change and fossil fuels and our need to get rid of it and decarbonize and move towards the post-carbon world in the 21st century. That's kind of understood generally, right? So there are two things. One thing, what I believe is happening is some kind, and I don't know if this is psychologically true or what, but I think it's kind of tendency, almost like in the religious times, we're trying to purge ourselves of environmental sins. So we have kind of scapegoating everything carbon-based, and we want to get rid of it as quick as possible, and we want to have renewable energy and electric cars and solar panels and wind turbines and all of that. It's like a green new future, like the green light at the end of the tunnel, and I believe that we want to leave all that dark, kind of environmentally destructive, spewing these emissions and polluting the air behind as sort of like great and important industrial revolution, but that period is now gone. That's what I believe is happening. However, as we purge ourselves of these environmental sins, so to speak, right, the analogy, and move towards sort of green and clean culture, right, I believe that it's easy to not want to see or acknowledge that this renewable energy future, it hinges on rare minerals, rare metals, because we can't have these electrical vehicles and wind turbines and all of this infrastructure, all of the transmission lines and recharging batteries and all of this renewable energy infrastructure without these rare minerals such as copper, palladium, or cobalt, or nickel, or aluminium, or graphite, bauxite, all of these minerals, right? For example, the World Bank estimates that the demand for these minerals will increase 500-fold by 2030, which is crazy, right? So we're going to need much more of these minerals to facilitate this decarbonization transition. So, and this process of digging these minerals from the ground is environmentally harmful, destructive. And this is not just supply and demand. This is actually different, because any mining company who wants to mine these rare minerals can say, well, but it's aligned with the net zero target and decarbonization efforts, right? So we're actually doing good for the environment. So I think this is a huge issue. First region we're going to look at is Jarrah forest in Western Australia. Jarrah is a common name for Eucalyptus marginata, which is a species of eucalypt, gum tree, endemic to Western Australia. This Jarrah forest, about the size of Tasmania, is very ecologically biodiverse, rich ecosystem. It hosts almost 800 native plant and tree species and many animal species, and some of them threatened. For example, and forgive me, I can't remember everything. For example, western quoll, which is threatened, western ringtail possum, quokka, or Carnabis cockatoo, and many other threatened species. So above the ground, we have this biodiverse, rich forest with its orchids and animals and trees and plants, and in the ground we have the fungi, this very rich multi-story complex vegetation of forest, right, that retains moisture, it's not dry, unlike the tree plantations, etc., right? So that's above ground. But beneath the ground, we have deposits of palladium, platinum, copper, and nickel, and bauxite, right? And that's what the mining companies are mining, right? Already, the area the size of 100, the equivalent of 100 New York City Central Parks, had been mined in the Jarrah Forest region of Western Australia. And another area, the size of 40 New York City Central Parks, is slated for clearing. If you want these the evidence and research and all that, go to the video, to the article, which is linked in the video description. Okay? Now, and here is the point. So, of the green invisible hand. Now the mining company can now say, well, but we need to get these resources, because if we don't, we won't meet our targets. We need to decarbonize, and we need renewable energy infrastructure, wind turbines, solar panels, and we need electric vehicles and all the transmission lines and rechargeable wires and all that, recharging stations and all of that. So we actually doing environmental good by mining these resources. And well, unfortunately, there is forest here, but so be it. And you can't get angry at them. We don't have perfect world, and it is unfortunate because I love nature. I run a sustainable consultancy, right? I love the environment. But this is the kind of conundrum we are yet to resolve. It is not simple supply and demand, that invisible hand of Adam Smith, because they didn't consider the environment at all. It was simply what I'm pursuing my self-interest, you pursuing your self-interest, and the society is better off as a result of individuals pursuing their self-interest. That's the old model. Now we have the green invisible hand, which kind of moves and operates based on what results in a low carbon activity. And to demonstrate that, let's now look at the Congo Basin. Currently, mining is responsible for only 7% of global deforestation. The main reasons for deforestation are clearing for cattle grazing, for growing food, growing plantation, collecting firewood in Central Africa, etc. Right? So only 7% for mining. However, as we know, the demand for these rare minerals is on the rise, and it's going to increase 500-fold by 2030, according to the World Bank. Now, what does it mean for the Congo Basin, for the second largest primary rainforest after the Amazon? Well, it means that the forest is going to go. Why? Because, unfortunately, there are rare minerals, paradoxically called green metals, because they facilitate renewable energy and decarbonization, right? Bauxite, nickel, coltan, palladium, platinum, stored beneath the trees, beneath the rainforest. Well, they're going to go. And let me illustrate this logic of the green invisible. Now, let's say that you are a mining executive and you find a deposit of cobalt in the Congo. Okay? And your surveys, your geological survey tells you that mining 10 hectares of primary rainforest will get you enough cobalt to produce 1,000 electric cars, electric car batteries. Okay? And that calculation may show you that by producing 1,000 electric cars, if you drive them for 20 years, people drive them, if you sell them and drive them for 20 years, you will avoid 10,000 tons of CO2 emissions. That didn't go to the atmosphere because obviously electric cars don't emit emissions, but if you compare it with petrol cars that would release 10,000 tons of CO2 emissions, you as a mining executive can say, well, because we mine this cobalt on these 10 hectares and therefore were able to produce 1,000 EV vehicles, we were able to avoid 10,000 tons of CO2 emissions. And you're right, right? Now that's one side of the calculation. If you look at this activity purely from the market-based, carbon-based green invisible hand activity, you would be well incentivized to do it, because you might actually analyze, if you do it properly, you might analyze, I don't want to say properly as in good, as I agree with it, but I mean you don't just mine it and do nothing. You might say, well, if we keep these 10 hectares of primary rainforest over the period of 20 years, it will store only, say, 2,000 tons of CO2. So us mining the minerals and producing the cars and avoiding 10,000 tons of CO2 is better for the environment than leaving the forest as it is, because if we leave it as it is, it will only draw and store 2,000 tons of CO2. That's the kind of logic, right? And this is the biggest danger, I believe. Now, in summary, I wanted to give you some examples of where the green invisible hand can actually destroy the environment, which is a paradox, but that's what's happening. And I think the biggest problem here is that if we're looking at our economic activities through the lens of just, yes, profit and loss and supply and demand, but also just reduction of carbon dioxide as a single objective, we can actually do so much harm, as those two examples I gave you demonstrate. Okay? So now, next time, we'll be following on. We're doing these Green Invisible Hand series. This is the third video in a series and article. Next time, we will look at reforestation, revegetation, and carbon offsets. Because oftentimes mining companies, they reforest, revegetate an area somewhere else to kind of make up for that environmental destruction they do by mining. That's one thing they do. Or they, and not only mining companies, right, they buy carbon offsets. So by buying carbon offset, they are supporting planting trees or mangroves or grasslands somewhere else in the world, because climate change and global warming is global, so they don't have to revegetate next to the mine or buy carbon offset and replant next to the mine. They can do it anywhere in the world because it's global issue, right? So they buy enough carbon offset for the volume of the greenhouse gas emissions that went up to the atmosphere as a result of their business activity, whether it was mining or flying planes or whatever that company does. They buy enough carbon offsets to make up for the CO2 emissions they caused by their activity to be drawn down, to be absorbed from the atmosphere and stored, right? Whether it's 10 hectares of forest or 5 hectares of mangroves or 15 hectares of grasslands or mix of this and that kind of thing. But again, these are market instruments. We're still talking green invisible hand. This is a market instrument, right? Carbon offsets, definitely. So it's aligned with what we're doing here, right? But again, there are big issues with this, and that's something we're going to be doing next time. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and you have a great day.